Hi everyone, this video I'm giving the rear brakes on my Avanzato a check over, but first I have to get at them, and that means removing a locking wheel nut that hasn't been touched since the car was parked up in 2004. So it looks a bit crusty, and with this pin type design there is a risk that it will slip and chew itself up. To lower the chances of that happening, I used a 5mm drill bit to clean up the holes and made sure that the key was properly seated in there, and that managed to let me get it cracked off. Unsurprisingly, the wheel was stuck to the hub, so that needed a good thump with a mallet to get it off, and as you can see there's some proper corrosion going on between the alloy and the drum. Out comes the wire wheel, and that gets scoured off so I can see what I'm doing. Unlike the front hubs, the rear uses a split pin to secure a castellated nut in place. So once the ends of that are bent back a bit, the easiest thing to do is just snip them off. Then I used an offcut of steel rod, knocked into the eye to get a grip on the split pin, and got it pulled out of the nut. Bit of plus gas on the bleed nipple for when I bleed the brakes, and I gave the main nut a good dose of it too. Now, these nuts can take a good bit of effort to get off, so I removed the centre cap from the wheel and put the wheel back on. Then lowered the car's weight back down onto it and made sure the handbrake was on. Next I got my proper breaker bar out and with a 36mm socket got it started turning. Car back up with the wheel off, and I removed the nut, spring washer and plain washer, then made sure the handbrake was back off again. The drum was a little stuck on the hub splines, and a tap with a mallet didn't change that. So, after a brief consultation with my neighbour's dog, I used a puller to help get it moving. With drums, you have to be careful that what's stopping it coming off isn't a lip worn onto the edge of the drum, in which case you need to be backing off the shoes before trying to get it off. But in this case, it was just a bit sticky on the axle splines, and it soon came free. Spraying down the brake mechanism and the drum with cleaner, all the hardware looked pretty good. So luckily I wasn't going to need to mess with that, but the drum had some corrosion patches from being sat for so long. It wasn't bad enough that it wouldn't have cleaned itself off with a bit of use, but while I had the drum off anyway, I cleaned up the braking surface and made sure the rest of the drum was wire brushed down, ready for painting, including removing the rubber bung for accessing the adjustment. After this, it got another blast with a brake cleaner to remove the resulting dust, and I masked up all the areas that I didn't want painted. The paint I used is the same stuff that I used on my front calipers, and you can pretty much get all four corners done with one can, I'd say. With the paint on, I left it to cure and prepared the hub area for reassembly. There are two holes through the thread for the split pin, giving more combinations that will line up with the nut, and they can get quite blocked up with crud, so I'm using a 5mm drill bit to just make sure they're cleared through. And also I'm ensuring that the threads themselves are cleaned up with the brush. Now that the paint had cured, I put a light smear of high temperature grease on the splines to make sure they'll come back off again easily in the future. After that the drum just slots on and any excess grease pushed out gets wiped off. You're better to put the grease on the drum so that the excess gets pushed outwards, not inside where it might get on the friction surfaces. The fastening hardware can now go back on, which is an easy thing to get going by hand. To get it properly tightened up, I need to put the wheel back on, again with no centre cap, and put the car's weight on it to give me something to work against. I'm not putting the handbrake on this time because I have the other side apart as well, and there is a risk that if you put the handbrake on without the drum, it'll try and adjust the shoes out too far and you won't be able to get the drum back on over them. Once the nut is tightened up, I need to check how the slots in it line up with the holes in the thread, and pick the nearest pair to just tighten up fractionally for a perfect alignment of the two, so I can get the split pin in. The combination of 3 slots in a nut and 2 holes in a thread means there's always one that's not far off being right. The assembly feels pretty good and the holes are nicely aligned, so I'm ready to put a split pin in. I got one that's 5mm diameter and 55mm length of the straight section. It's actually stainless steel to avoid rust, and it just needs to be tapped home with a hammer. As I said, you can't have the handbrake on at the moment, so I've used a crowbar to brace the hub from rotating while I bend the tabs of the split pin back with a hammer and a drift, or you can use a pair of pliers. Last thing to do, and I forgot to show this when I did the front brakes, is a smear of anti-seize grease just on the spigot of the hub to stop the wheel jamming on. You don't need to go crazy, just a light smear on the spigot. Then the wheel can go back on and the job's done. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video and perhaps found it a useful reference. Check back in with me next time, and don't forget to like, comment and subscribe below.